Thank you, Jessica. I'm very pleased to be here to talk to Janet Groth about this book she's written. She was already at the New Yorker when I got there, and I've been there so long that when people have complaints, they sometimes write me. I got a letter after the first picture appeared in the New Yorker of an actress, a photograph, bare breasts, and I got an outrage letter saying that how sad and disappointing it was that this magazine that had been known for its dignified, clear, understated prose had stooped to this. And my only defense was they were small breasts. So the understated part was still there. But the New Yorker, like the Strand, has been there for a long time. But like the Strand, has changed over the years. And the period that Jen was writing about was what I think of as a sort of quirky beast period, where it did come out every month, every week, but it was sort of a surprise that it could get out. And there were a lot of eccentric people and eccentric way of doing business that if a teen from Harvard Business School or Bain or somebody had come in, and I think they would have said it won't be able to come out next week unless you change your system entirely. I always said, for instance, that the financial part of the New Yorker was handled in a padded room on the 19th floor by a group of ancient female Jesuits with quill pens. So it was an odd place, and also it was an odd place because technologically it was way behind, even behind the late 50s, early 60s standards. And I thought we'd start by asking Jan what she did and what it was like compared to today when people have voicemail and telephones. We had to pick up the phone and say, Annie, could you give me an outside line? So what did you do, Jan, as the receptionist of the 18th floor?
Oh, it was very difficult, very demanding, but I don't know whether people could handle it anymore today, but we had something called message pads, yellow message pads. While you were out, so-and-so called, it would be my job to say, so-and-so called.
She did it just that way too, and it was very effective.
And that was pretty much the bulk of it. But about those eccentrics, the book owes something of a genesis to the fact that I'd been dining out for years under the cover that the New Yorker didn't use titles. Everybody from the mailroom people to Bud were on the same editorial personnel list. And I was going around telling New Yorker anecdotes at dinner, having a nice time out at Cincinnati where I was teaching. And it was not until 1973 when Jack Kahn wrote his book and blew my cover and talked about my having been an authentic oddity in the New Yorker among all those eccentrics. And because I had been a doctoral candidate and a person who wrote italic script and I don't know, other things that probably overqualified me for writing Who Called While You Were Out.
Well, the italic script helped a lot.
and so when Jack came up to my class at Vassar and then wrote about it in his memoir and said that, that she is this doctoral candidate, but she's been at the reception desk where she began at the New Yorker for 20 years. And of course, there it was, the receptionist. The cat was out of the bag. And so I thought, well, when I stopped writing about Edmund Wilson, it was Edmund Wilson, Jessica, not Edmund White. But never mind. And when I stopped writing about Edmund Wilson, I I thought, well, I really have a lot of stuff to say about myself. Some of the people who've read the book, Bud, have been a little disappointed that it's not all about you and the famous people on our floor.
I was terribly disappointed. I expected most of it to be about me.
It's anecdotally about you and about, maybe 40 of the other fellows and women who were on
Well,
the
they
floor.
can have their own books. I thought this one would be about me.
But I was wondering, I was reading something today about how tweeting is the self-expression of today. And maybe if there'd been tweeting, I'm not sure. That's 140 characters, isn't it, for a tweet? And my book is 60,000 words, thanks to the word count on my computer. About 8 characters a word. It's not 140 words, it's 140 characters, isn't it, per tweet? I would have had a half a million tweets in here. I could have had a lifetime full of tweets. I wouldn't have had to write the book. But I'm not sure where that puts us, in before or behind.
Well, I
technologically speaking.
also have to say that in addition to the italic script, you actually got the names right of the people who called. We found out how good Jan was at this receptionist job when somebody took over for her. She seemed somehow to have a deal with the New Yorker that gave her kind of an academic year, and so she would leave in the summer, and somebody would come on, and one of them left me a yellow slip that said I'd been called, and I looked and I said, I don't know any Pakistani playboys. It said I had been called by somebody named Ali Talia. And I later realized it was the airline. There was Alitalia. So she got the names right.
There was the famous case of Fred Butts. I had a little trouble hearing this man. Maybe he was calling from the airport, and the message you got.
And he had an English accent.
The message you got said that one Fred Butts had called you.
Yeah, that was.
He got such a kick out of it when you told him that he met me. He was enchanted about the Fred Butts thing. He later ran across me on the Lexington Avenue bus, and he said, "Hi, I'm Fred Butts."
Yeah,
his name was really sort of, I don't know.
His name was Stephen Fay, and he had said, he had said, "I'm a friend of Bud's."
It was a very noisy airport.
Tell us about some of the people you met. Like, was it Maeve Brennan who lived in the ladies' room for a while?
It was Maeve who had trouble with her beehive. That is, most people, when they think of a beehive hairdo, if you know it at all, think of it as a fairly controlled swoop of hair that goes up and adds in Maeve's case, wanted height to her very tiny frame, and she wore it. But when she was living on the streets or in the ladies' room at the New Yorker, it was hard for her to come by mirrors and combs and things, and that beehive really became more like a wasp's nest, I suppose you would say. It was pretty terrifying to see. And this is, we would smile, but it was a pretty sad thing.
Was Maeve Brennan the one that St. Clair McCalloway was married to?
Yes, they had apparently a wonderful short married life, and then
I think all of his married lives were short.
Yes, they decided that, I don't know, they had more fun drinking alone or with different people than with each other. But this all happened before we knew them. But McCalloway wrote a rather nostalgic short story about their young married life in the village, and that's how I sort of found out about
McCalloway, I remember this conversation. You may not remember, but I walked in there one day, and McCalloway had painted a big mural on the wall, and he wasn't an artist. And then he would grab cartoonists as they went by and have them paint something. And
All this had to be scrubbed down.
He
of course.
was, I guess, bipolar. One of the things that he wrote, the Edinburgh paper, was a lot of people think is one of the really finest descriptions of what it was like going into a manic episode. And he had a drinking problem. And I walked in once, and Jan said, there are painters back, we're painting the 18th floor. And I said, wasn't the 18th floor just painted about a year ago? And she
It was
said,
always gray, of course.
and she said, no, don't you realize they're doing it so they can paint over Mr. McKelway's mural without hurting his feelings? And I thought that was very sweet in the New Yorker.
Typical, though.
It was like living in a sanitarium in a way. I remember the great story of St. Clair McKelway going to the office manager and he said, it was Harding Mason. He said, Harding, I would like a secretary. And Mason said, Mac, you know at the New Yorker, writers don't have secretaries. And McKelway said, Ved Maida's got a secretary. And Harding Mason said, but Mac, Ved Maida's blind. And said, I too have afflictions. No secretary. So was she living there?
Well, going back to Maeve, who was the long-winded lady, if any of you remember, she had wonderful talents as well, and did so sort of. I think she was just depressive. I don't think she was manic ever.
So it's a good combination.
In any case, between using Jack Kahn's couch, because I don't know, your couch was not good for sleeping on because it was so full of newspapers and so on.
It was full of newspapers and God knows what else. Because I was out of
perhaps
town.
Mr. O'Leary, the mailman, who did like to occasionally sleep there, was under there somewhere.
We don't know.
We don't know.
It was a very disgusting sort of day bed with a kind of a blue cover. And when the New Yorker was moving, and my wife constantly said when she came to the office, you've got to get rid of that. That is truly disgusting. It's just, it's mortifying when you have this in your office. And then when the New Yorker was moving across the street, Sheila McGraw, the sort of office manager, came and said, the Smithsonian is looking for an office to take. One of the kind of ratty New Yorker offices in case they want to have an exhibit somehow. And they want your office. They want the stuff in your office. And if you give them that, I'll give you, when we move across the street, E.B. White's desk. And I said, deal. And then I went home and I said to my wife, you know, we're moving and we can't take everything. I'm not taking the day bed. Guess where it's going. She did not guess the Smithsonian Institution. So it's there, so it's probably in Arlington somewhere. I think in a
It's
warehouse.
probably right next to Julia Child's kitchen. Or
Yeah.
Archie Bunker's easy chair.
And so, but your duties, Jan, took on more than just those yellow slips, because you were sort of, what would we say, that you weren't old enough to be the den mother, but you were sort of a keeper.
Den
I
sister,
think.
maybe, I don't know.
I think you were the keeper of the various eccentrics.
I did care about everybody very much and look after their messages very well, and sometimes the plants, if you had plants in your office, and sometimes your houses when you were away.
Yes.
I was a house sitter for the Trillins, and there's a little thing in the book about the day that I had Bud's daughters, then very much closer to preschool age than their own children are now, than their grandchildren are now. But Alice decided that they needed a little exposure to Midwestern Christmas customs, and would I teach them how we made Christmas cookies out in Iowa. And so I had them up my apartment, and we made wonderful snowmen and trees and stars, and they did it beautifully, and I think you ate them all up.
I just informed them this morning that the person who discovered the piece of papyrus that seems to indicate, by some people's reckoning, that Jesus was married, Karen King, who has a chair and originally used to be their babysitter, and was known to them as the gold medal winner at the Montana State Fair in cake decoration.
See, I was completely put under a shadow when Karen King came along.
Well,
I had no
they
gold
said,
medal.
this discovery seems to be something, but it can't match that cake decoration. Cake decoration was something. How about some of the other people, Jan, besides Mae Brennan, St. Clair McElway? Did you have much dealing with Popsy Whitaker?
Popsy came down from the 19th floor to do fact-checking and then later editing of people who were on 18. But mainly he came around hanging onto his suspenders. He had one of those sloping fronts that involved suspenders and quite a sagging and
always in a suit.
Yes, well, yes, but he had his favorites. I somehow or other escaped that distinction, but he did like to give roses to certain women around the office.
I didn't know that because
it was always unrequited, which tended to make him even droopier and saggier. And,
he was talking like this. He seemed to be sort of bullying the fact checker, so I didn't have much time for him, but I did admire him. Late in his life, he had a huge operation, and they took most of his stomach out, I think, and apparently he woke up and said to the nurse, "Was it a girl or a boy?" And I really had to admire him for that, for holding that line while he was under anesthetic, just to get it at the end. He was a mean guy, Popsy.
Growled a lot, yes.
And when Freddie Packard, who was shaped like a barrel, would walk very slowly down the hall, apparently he once said to a checker, "What organization does that float represent?" He had what we call in the Midwest a mean tongue.
He did indeed. Well, yes, but I always tried to sort of mellow everybody out, you know. Lots of people who were stuck writing behind their enclosed offices never met each other, and if they wanted to meet somebody who was writing they had enjoyed, they would have to come through me and say, "Couldn't you figure out a way for me to meet John McPhee," let's say. Right. And very often I was the person who put the people together. And in fact,
she was the social director.
Yeah, let's not forget the jazz band,
right.
which I really take great credit for. Lee Lorenz, the cartoonist who later became the art director after James Garrity, was the main trumpeter. And in fact, I think he still blows the trumpet on Monday night.
Still Sunday night. Sunday night at Arthur's Tavern. He plays the cornet.
It's a cornet.
He plays the cornet at Arthur's Tavern.
It must have been Warren.
It's wonderful.
Warren Miller then who did the trumpet, because I was going to give the cornet to Warren. Aha! I hope I didn't do that in my text, but in any case.
Lee plays the cornet,
yes.
and they still play. And when you walk in there, you're in about 1954. They not only at this time of year still have their St. Patrick's decorations, they still have their Christmas decorations. And
it's easier if you don't take them down, you know.
Who besides Popsy did Eleanor Gould? Did you have any? And you know
no,
what?
She was always up. It was a strict hierarchy, and people from 19 and 20 very seldom met or mingled with people on the 18. And so
some of the sort of older, more established writers were on 20, right? I mean, some of the old timers.
That's right. That's what makes it sort of unusual that Joseph Mitchell, who was a 20th floor, and I should have had any meetings at all. But it was because we met outside of the 18th and 20th floors. We met at Costello's, and we happened to be talking about James Joyce, which was a great
big subject
of Joseph Mitchell's, and I happened to be quoting something from Joyce's Dubliners, and he noticed me and gave me quite a lot of attention after that. We went to lunch for 6 years, every Friday.
He came into the office every day, even though he published the second, one of the Joe Gould pieces, Joe Gould's Secret, I think just after I got there in about 1964. And then he came into the office every day and didn't publish anything. And he was really my hero. And I used to, and my wife used to say, well, we knew him. Why don't you just ask him to lunch one day? No, I couldn't do that. Although he was a very approachable guy.
If only you'd said so to me, but I could have fixed it up.
Well, see, I didn't know that she was quite as much of a social director. I didn't even know she knew Joe Mitchell.
Not until you read the book.
Well, that's right. Well, maybe we should have some questions from the audience. Does anybody have some questions on the Porky Beast days? Yes.
Do you have any memories of A.J. Liebling that you can share?
Oh, well, a number of wonderful memories. I suppose at the risk of concentrating on a lunch, I'll tell you about a lunch that A.J. Liebling and Joseph Mitchell took me to at the Red Devil, a seafood restaurant in the neighborhood. And it seemed to the two of them, Mr. Liebling was a great, well, I suppose he was both a gourmet and a gourmand in the sense that he ate with great relish.
He called it a feeder, I think. I think that was his word. He was a great feeder.
And the Red Devil had wonderful seafood dishes, and they thought it would be amusing to take the girl from the inland, from Iowa, to the seafood restaurant and show her how creatures came in off the deep with their feelers and their inks and their eyes and everything swimming around on the plate, and see what I did of it and made of it. Well, it was all I could do to look at it, never mind eat it. But the two of them knew how to pick everything up and suck the daylights out of it and enjoy it all the more and all the better if the eyes were there.
I suspect Joe Mitchell's books are in a place like the Strand are some of the most sought after books. I was at a secondhand bookstore in Seattle once, and I came across the one Joe Mitchell book I didn't have, which I think is called My Ears Have Been, the one that was partly stories from the World Telegram and Sun, and partly the New Yorker. And
as rare as Barnett Plummer is an unbloomed flower.
Yeah, a copy, if you have a copy of that, it's worth about 85 cents, unless I've signed it. And then
very, very rare, very hard to get.
60 cents maybe if I've signed it. But I couldn't believe I was seeing it. Like I took it off the shelf and put it back on, and finally I went up and I checked out. I took a couple of other books too, just to avoid suspicion, and he picked up My Ears Are Bent, and he said, "Where'd you get that book?" And I said, "At that shelf over there." And he said, "Well, that's half price. So it costs, I don't know, $1.50 or something, so $3. But I think nonfiction writers for years he's been the sort of model to follow.
One has an easier time finding a lot of best stuff because it's been put together up in the old hotel.
Yes.
Which is a fine compendium, and it's just come out in a new version in England. And the BBC called me up and said, "Will you talk about Joseph Mitchell to us on the BBC?"
Oh, nice.
So I did that. Yes.
Yes.
You were young when you took this job. How did, given the inside information that you have in your job, how did you have boundaries? How did you know what to tell to do?
In terms of all the scandals I was learning about, well, don't you think it was almost as if we'd all had some sort of indoctrination through the air. I don't know how Mr. Schwann managed to convey it, but there was a kind of politesse that closed down any wagging tongues or any disposition to be indiscreet. And the minute you walked in the doors, I can only say that I thought of that as a sacred trust.
It was a very discreet place. I remember somebody was doing a piece on the New Yorker, the concerned New Yorker, at some point, and I mentioned it to Mr. Shawn, and he said, "Well, what you can, what you do is up to you, but we don't talk to the press." And I said, "But we are the press." And I said, "I can't ask other people to talk to me." And then, and it was almost, it's hard to know, hard to realize now as you read the New Yorker, but it was in language. It was the most repressed sort of place in going.
I thought Louis Menand's piece recently about editors at the New Yorker.
John
Was
McPhee.
it? Oh, I'm so sorry.
John McPhee.
Yes.
He quoted some stuff I had said at a Moth gathering. The Moth has an evening every New Yorker festival called Tales Out of School, and I talked about my attempts to get inappropriate words in the New Yorker during Mr. Shawn's regime. And I don't think, or maybe I mentioned that my first experience of this was I had done a piece on rapid eye movement sleep, and it said that the cats deprived of dreams in these experiments tried to mount other cats, and pretty much regardless of sex. And I was out of town, and I was talking to the editor, and he said, "Mr. Shawn doesn't insist on this, but he wonders if we could find another way of saying that besides mount." And I
Think how
said,
far we've come.
I said, "What did he have in mind?" And he said, "Oh, something like made a sexual advance toward." And I said, "It's a cat. We're talking here about a cat." And I had a hard time over the years, in fiction.
I can't remember how that turned out, but
We put him out. We were just daring. We put him out. And then I just took a piece that he wouldn't let in. He wouldn't let the language in because it was fiction. I just said, "Well, if it's fiction, I'll just sell it somewhere else." Where we got into trouble where it was when it was reporting, and it was a quote, and I said, "Well, you're telling me I can't listen when the other reporters are still listening." I don't want to do that, but in fiction, I did a piece about the sudden fashion in black things. This was in the 60s or so, and there was mention of a maternity dress store in Harlem called Mother Jumpers, and Roger Angel said I don't think he'll let that in, and I talked to him,
no, but he thought of it as jumpers, you see.
well, that's what he said you can't use it. He said you have a euphemism. I said it is a euphemism. It's already a euphemism. But I sort of respected him for it. He just, you couldn't say, "Oh, well, Partisan Review said such and such this week," or something. He didn't care what they said. I mean, I think that he was offended by the thought that somebody like his Aunt Hilda would read the magazine and be offended. So it was a very discreet place, and nobody knew exactly. I mean, like Leo Hofeller was sort of the person who hired people, but it was really unclear whether that was the person who hired people. And Richard Harris used to say that he offered a 2-week expense-paid vacation in Jamaica for anybody who could figure out what Leo Hofeller did. But I don't think there wasn't any table of organization chart. As I say, if someone had come in who knew anything about things, they would say, "This magazine can't possibly come out next week." Yes?
Thank you. I came to the New Yorker quite by accident. I was out in the University of Minnesota finishing my bachelor's degree in August of 1957, and I learned through my brother, who worked for a man who sent lighter than air balloons filled with helium. Otto Linsen had his balloon factory out in Bloomington, and he was sending a balloon into the stratosphere, a manned balloon with David Simon, who was the man who preceded John Glenn. This was just before Cape Canaveral. And all of this was of enough interest so that CBS was sending a science show out. It was a Sunday show, but it was a very respectable show. And the writer-director wanted somebody to be what they used to call a Gal Friday. So my brother said, if you're going out to New York, you'd better just hop on over here and apply for this job. And I got it, and I was okay with it. And Mr. Ziegart, who was the writer-director of the show, said, when you're in New York, when you're ready to come out, send me a resume. And I didn't know anybody else in New York, so I sent him a resume. And he got it when he was fishing with E.B. White in Maine. And he evidently was so full of praise for this wonderful girl from Minnesota who needed a job in New York that Mr. White agreed to see me. He never did that, never did it before, never did it again.
So he was the guy who hired people at the New Yorker. Finally, we find out who hired people.
I'm telling you, it was unprecedented. And so
Yes, but there.
I'm sorry. Oh, well, Kathleen wants me to tell the whole of the first chapter, but it's all about that first interview. But it's a wonderful chapter, and we do recommend it, Kathleen.
Go ahead.
Is there a restaurant or a bar these days that doesn't feel places?
Oh, yeah. I don't think Bud's a good
I don't-
source for
I don't
this.
think so.
He's
I-
not a
when-
good source for this. He's not a bar guy.
Well, when my girls came along, I sort of quit writing up there very much and worked at home mainly. And so in those days, I guess the closest thing, I think the old timers, the sort of 20th floor people, would have gone to a place like Costello's, or there was another place besides Costello's.
Yeah, but this man wants the bar they go to now.
But and then by the time I was there, a lot of people went to the lobby of the Algonquin. Now I have no idea. I mean, because I live in the village and I don't.
There's very disquieting news from the Algonquin. The lobby has apparently been wrecked and undone, and somebody new was there and decided
I haven't been there for a while.
Didn't realize that they had a
But I think that was the
heritage.
closest in our day to a place where people went. I always liked to go with Harris because I figured Harris tipped that nasty head waiter 20 or 30 grand a year or something. So because he always was ushered in. So I said.
Well, he was what is known as an habitué.
Yeah, he was an habitué. There, I have to say also that in those days, there, not just in the New Yorker, but all over Midtown, in newspapers and advertising agencies, I mean, there was an awful lot of drinking. I mean, the amount of drinking that would be just astonishing today, I think. People just stopped and spent a lot of time at the bar. I don't think people do that. And drank at lunchtime a lot.
But before we go, we should show those cartoons. And I've got my PowerPoint here.
Okay.
But I don't blame Bud for not thinking about the very brief period when I was not on the 18th floor. I was in the cartoon department called the art department, and I made a, what shall we say, a wrong turn, romantically speaking. And there was a cartoonist there who really did me wrong. And at the same time, it worked out all right because he drew me some very funny pictures he had an office when I was when I lost my position on the 18th on the 20th floor in the art department, largely because I wasn't tough enough. You have to be tough with those cartoonists. You have to say, well, that cartoon is not being bought this week.
Yeah.
And that's very-
not, that doesn't sound hard.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I was never good at it. I was never good at it. And there were people there who were better. So, you know, I wound up back on the 18th floor. In the meanwhile, this cartoonist who had done me wrong also wound up back on the 18th floor. And I guess we'll skim through, Joshua, a few of the, well, you might want to see me when I first came, 19, oh my goodness. But I hope you remember this from the National Arts Club.
I wasn't there yet.
All right. Now let me see. Let's move right along to maybe Joseph Mitchell and I, in the days when we were having lunch, found a lot to say to each other, and this was our conversation at the 50th anniversary party at the Plaza Hotel, and Joe wrote me a sweet note later saying that he said anybody who looked at us could tell that we're a couple of Bible students discussing a couple of chapters of the New Testament, I think it was, and he thought it was a comparison of something in New Thessalonians with something from Galatians. And then, while I was at the art department, I met Arthur Getz, who is a very fine cover artist and an artist in general, and he did some portraits of me and had me model for a show he was doing. And then quite, I don't know, because he had some sketches of me or one thing or another, and because I wore my hair that way, put me in a movie theater booth and put me on the cover of the New Yorker. And my dad thought that was particularly wonderful because we used to own a movie theater. Oh, here we are, the mea culpa in cartoons by the Mr. Wrong, whose office was on my. You'll see the yellow message pads, as a matter of fact. He used a couple of them to leave me those introductions to what became a series every morning of rough cartoons called the Soup Puns. And there was a bowl of soup in each one, and the first one was a duck soup. You see it there. He thinks of himself as a monstrous guy, therefore it's Gargantua. And the next one is, I think, the first of the Soup Puns. You'll have to tell me what it says and what we're seeing. Oh yes, the man up at the pole with some dogs and some sleds, and I don't know, I guess he thought it was as close as he could get to bird's nest soup. Terrible puns, really dreadful puns. Each morning. What's the next one? Oh yes, this is sort of cute. He was always inspired when he could do a nifty-looking female figure, tomato with quackers. Vichyssoise. Terrible puns. Yep. Maybe the worst one of all. Now, this takes a little explaining. Spam. There's a can of Spam in this soup, in this bowl. He thought I came not from Iowa, which is where I was born, but from where I went to high school in a town in Minnesota called Austin, which is the home of Spam. And they actually have a Spam museum there now, and so it's homemade soup. The turtle is Green Turtle, smoking a cigar. And this is my favorite. He was always inspired by those nifty-looking dames. Wonton soup. And that was about Thank you, Joshua.
Are there other questions out here? Yes.
Could you elaborate on this famous love affair between William Shawn and Lillian Ross? Did you write a book of that?
She did write a book about it. I only need to, I think I allude to it very discreetly as the fact that Joseph Mitchell and I always met at the restaurants that we were lunching at, although we didn't think it through. We were being unnecessarily careful when, in fact, Lillian Ross and William Shawn walked through hand in hand almost daily through the office lobby, the downstairs lobby. But it was Lillian's book called Here But Not Here.
Something like that.
Yes, and somebody who was writing a pretty favorable review of my book, I think for the Washington Post, started it with, do we really need another book about the New Yorker? We've had Gone by Renata Adler, and we've had My New Yorker from Bed Mehta or Mr. Shawn in the New Yorker. And,
Two or three by Jack Kahn, Brendan Gill.
Yes, and Here But Not Here, we could think of ourselves as there but not there. But this particular book of Janet Groth takes a different angle and goes on to say.
I actually wrote a column once about imagining, this was before I had grandchildren, imagining sitting on the porch in Nova Scotia with my grandchildren who wouldn't believe I ever worked at the New Yorker because I hadn't written a book about it. And they all had, in these days, they all had those Irish names I could never pronounce, like Chipon and Moira, and I don't know why. And they said, Jeremy's book, he had lunch with Mr. Shawn all the time. Did you ever have lunch with Mr. Shawn all the time? So there have been a lot of books, but they're different. And I mean, the thing about the New Yorker is because it wasn't very organized, everybody's idea of what it was different. And it was, to a great extent, it was just a whole lot of people, each of whom had some relationship with Shawn, but not with each other necessarily. There weren't any departments, there weren't any bureau chiefs or anything like that.
You could say, me least of all. It was only when somebody like one of our writers' wives would get nervous about where her husband was and start bugging Mr. Shaw that he would call me at home, and he would never do anything like bug me, but he did want that bug taken away from him, and I was able to help him calm the wife down.
One more question?
You were all out of questions.
Well, thank you very much.